walked in and sat down. We were singing, and Pastor just got through with the morning prayer and walked back in his office. And after lifting the offering, this man got up and walked to the back in the study where Pastor was.
As we were singing, about maybe one verse in, I noticed him go back to the pastor's room, made nothing about it. And then next thing I hear is boom, boom.
I didn't realize what was going on. I heard a boom, and then we all ran out of the church. I tried to stop Pastor's wife from going back there, but she pushed me out of the way.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a story that's equal parts inspiring and heartbreaking, a story that reminds us how one person's life can ripple through a community, leaving a legacy of hope, but also how tragedy can strike in the most unexpected places. This is the story of Reverend William B, schooler, a pastor, a veteran, an educator, and a pillar of Dayton, Ohio, whose life was cut short in a shocking act of violence. We're going to walk through his incredible journey, the impact he had, and the questions his death left behind. So, grab a seat, maybe a cup of coffee, and let's get into it. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss any of our deep dives into stories like this one. Let's start at the beginning. William B. Schooler was born in 1945 in Dayton, Ohio, a city known for its tight-knit communities and industrial roots. Growing up in the post-World War II era, William was raised in a family that valued faith, responsibility, and service. He was one of 13 siblings, a big family where love and loyalty were the glue holding everyone together. Dayton in the 1950s wasn't always an easy place to grow up, especially for African American families like the Schoolers, who faced systemic challenges. But William's parents instilled in him a sense of purpose, something bigger than himself. By the time he was a teenager, William was already showing signs of the leader he'd become. He graduated from Dunbar High School in 1963, a school with a proud legacy of educating African American students in Dayton. Dunbar wasn't just a place to learn math or history, it was a community hub where young people like William were encouraged to dream big. And that's exactly what he did. After high school, William didn't just sit back, he answered a call to serve his country. At a time when the United States was deeply entangled in the Vietnam War, William Schooler enlisted in the U.S. Army. This wasn't a decision to take lightly. Vietnam was a brutal conflict, and young men were coming home changed, if they came home at all. But William, barely out of his teens, stepped into this challenge with courage. He served with distinction, earning the Bronze Star, a prestigious award given for heroic or meritorious service in a combat zone. Think about that for a second, a young man from Dayton, facing the chaos of war, and coming out not just as a survivor, but as a decorated veteran. What's remarkable about William's time in Vietnam is that it didn't harden him. War has a way of breaking people or making them cynical, but for William, it did the opposite. It deepened his sense of duty. He saw the worst of humanity, yet he came home determined to make his community better. That's the kind of person he was. Someone who took the hardest moments and turned them into fuel for good. When William returned to Dayton, he didn't rest on his laurels. He could have taken an easier path, but instead, he dove into another kind of service, education. He started working in the Dayton public school system, where he quickly became more than just a teacher. To his students, William was a mentor, a role model, and sometimes even a father figure. He had this calm, steady presence that made you feel seen and valued. He wasn't the kind of teacher who just clocked in and out, he knew his students' names, asked about their families, and showed up for their games or events. Over time, William's impact grew. He rose through the ranks to become a principal in the Jefferson Township School District, a role he held for nearly 2 decades. As a principal, he wasn't stuck behind a desk pushing papers. He was out in the hallways, talking to kids, challenging them to be their best, and supporting their families. If a student was struggling, William was the kind of leader who'd sit down with them, figure out what was going on, and help them find a way forward. He believed education wasn't just about grades, it was about building character and hope. By 1997, after nearly 20 years in education, William decided to retire from the school system. But retirement for William didn't mean slowing down. It meant redirecting his energy to another calling, one that had been part of his life since childhood, his faith. Faith was always at the core of William Schooler's life. His father, Reverend William Schooler, had been a pastor at St. Peter's Missionary Baptist Church in Dayton, and William grew up in the church, surrounded by scripture and service. After his father's passing in the 1970s, William stepped into his father's shoes, becoming the pastor of St. Peter's. This wasn't just a job for him, it was a calling. He embraced it fully, becoming a shepherd not just to his congregation, but to the entire community. As a pastor, William was known for sermons that were both grounded in the Bible and deeply relevant to everyday life. He had a way of connecting scripture to the struggles and hopes of his congregation. Whether it was a young person facing tough choices or a family dealing with loss, William's words offered guidance and comfort. He didn't preach from a pedestal, he spoke as someone who'd been through his own battles and knew what it meant to keep going. But William's ministry went beyond the pulpit. He was a leader in the broader Dayton community, serving as interim president of the Dayton School Board and president of the local Baptist Ministers Union. He worked with civic leaders, youth organizations, and other churches, always looking for ways to lift people up. Whether it was advocating for better education or fighting for fair access to resources, William was there, rolling up his sleeves and getting to work. One example. When PNC Bank tried to close its branch at the Westtown Shopping Center, a move that would have hit the local African American community hard, William was at the forefront, fighting to keep it open. He wasn't just a pastor, he was a champion for justice, someone who saw his faith as a call to action. Let's pause for a moment to take stock of who William Schooler was by this point in his life. He was a decorated Vietnam veteran, an educator who'd shaped countless lives, a pastor who led with wisdom and compassion, and a community leader who never stopped fighting for what was right. He was the kind of person who showed up, day after day, year after year, for the people around him. His life was a testament to service, to faith, and to the belief that one person could make a difference. But as we'll see, even a life as remarkable as William's wasn't immune to tragedy. On February 28, 2016, everything changed in a way no one could have predicted. Let's talk about what happened that Sunday morning, and the events that led to one of the most shocking moments in Dayton's history.
Our pastor just got shot by his brother. He's still shooting him.
It was a typical Sunday at St. Peter's Missionary Baptist Church. The sanctuary was filled with the energy of worship, people singing, praying, and coming together as a community. Reverend William Schooler had just finished his sermon, and the congregation was still buzzing with fellowship. As was his habit, William slipped into his office behind the pulpit, a quiet space where he often prayed or met with parishioners. It was a moment of calm, a chance to reflect before the rest of the day unfolded. But that calm was shattered in an instant. A man walked into the sanctuary, someone the congregation knew but never expected to bring violence into their sacred space. It was Daniel Schooler, William's younger brother, 68 years old at the time. Witnesses later recalled that Daniel seemed quiet, almost contemplative, as he sat in a pew for a few minutes. No one could have known what was coming next. Without warning, Daniel stood up, walked toward the pastor's office, and moments later, gunshots rang out. The sound was jarring, unthinkable in a place of worship. The congregation, still lingering in the sanctuary, panicked. People ran for the exits, their hearts pounding as the reality of what was happening sank in. Inside the office, Daniel had drawn a handgun and fired multiple rounds at his brother. William, 71, was the only target. There was no struggle, no argument, just a sudden, intentional act of violence. Police and emergency responders arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. William Schooler was found collapsed in his office, his life taken in the very place where he'd offered so much hope. Daniel, still at the scene, surrendered without resistance, his demeanor eerily calm. The sanctuary, once a place of peace, was now a crime scene, and the community was left reeling. The shock of William's death was compounded by the identity of the shooter, his own brother. William and Daniel were 2 of 13 siblings, raised in a close-knit family where faith and togetherness were paramount. But somewhere along the way, their paths had diverged. To understand why, we need to look at Daniel Schooler's life and the struggles that defined it. Daniel wasn't a stranger to the justice system or to personal challenges. Over the years, he'd faced multiple run-ins with the law, each one painting a picture of a man grappling with untreated mental illness. Family members later confirmed that Daniel had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, conditions that, when unmanaged, could lead to unpredictable and sometimes violent behavior. As children, William and Daniel had been close, but as adults, Daniel's mental health struggles created a growing divide. In 2001, he was charged with felonious assault and carrying a concealed weapon. He initially pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity but later accepted a guilty plea and was sentenced to probation. The court noted that Daniel might be mentally ill and in need of treatment, but that warning didn't lead to lasting intervention. In 2002, Daniel was convicted of another violent act, beating, biting, and choking a woman in his home. He served 2 years in prison, but his behavior didn't change. In 2007, he attacked a friend with a golf club, leaving the man with a black eye. The victim declined to press charges, citing Daniel's mental health issues. A year later, in 2008, Daniel was arrested again after throwing a hammer and charging at 2 men with a knife. Each incident pointed to a pattern. Daniel's violence often flared when he wasn't taking his medication. Despite this history, Daniel was able to obtain a handgun and walk into St. Peter's that Sunday morning. The question on everyone's minds was, how? How could someone with such a documented history of mental illness and violence have access to a weapon? It was a question that would haunt the Schooler family, the congregation, and the entire Dayton community. The days following the shooting were a blur of grief and disbelief. The Schooler family was shattered, grappling with the loss of William and the arrest of Daniel. For a family of 13 siblings, the tragedy was a double blow, losing one brother to death and another to a crime that seemed incomprehensible. William's niece, Joyce Napier, spoke of the family's love for both brothers, despite the pain. "We're a family, and we stick together," she said, her words carrying the weight of a love that refused to break, even in the face of such loss. At St. Peter's, the congregation mourned a pastor who'd been their rock. William had been there for baptisms, weddings, funerals, every milestone in their lives. His death left a void that couldn't be filled. Candlelight vigils lit up Dayton streets, and local leaders, from pastors to elected officials, came together to honor a man who'd given so much. William's funeral, held at Omega Baptist Church, drew hundreds, family, friends, former students, and community members who'd been touched by his kindness. But beyond the grief, there was anger and a demand for answers. How had the system failed so spectacularly? The Community Progress Institute of Dayton issued a statement calling the shooting a tragedy that highlighted the failures of gun regulations and mental health support. They argued that more needed to be done, through legislation, community action, and systemic change, to prevent something like this from happening again. Daniel Schooler was charged with 3 counts of murder, 2 counts of felonious assault, and 2 counts of using weapons while under disability. He was denied bond and held at Montgomery County Jail, where his case began a long and complex journey through the legal system. His attorney raised concerns about his mental competence, citing his history of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. For a time, it wasn't clear if Daniel would even be fit to stand trial. After multiple evaluations, he was deemed competent, but the question of motive remained elusive. Investigators looked into the brothers' past and found a dismissed lawsuit Daniel had filed against William over family estate matters. But they concluded the shooting wasn't about money or a specific grudge. Instead, it seemed rooted in Daniel's untreated mental illness and a lifetime of unresolved struggles. The tragedy wasn't just a family matter. It was a stark reminder of how mental health issues, when ignored, can lead to devastating consequences. Reverend William B. Schooler's life was a masterclass in service. From the battlefields of Vietnam to the classrooms of Dayton to the pulpit of St. Peter's, he lived with purpose and compassion. His death was a tragedy, but his legacy is one of resilience, faith, and community. He fought for education, for justice, and for the young people of Dayton, and his work inspired others to carry on that fight. Today, as we reflect on this story, we're left with big questions. How do we better support those with mental health challenges? How do we keep guns out of the hands of those who shouldn't have them? And how do we honor a man like William Schooler, whose life was a beacon of hope? These aren't easy questions, but they're ones we need to keep asking. So, what do you think? How can we prevent tragedies like this in our communities? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if this story moved you, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that challenge us to think deeper and do better. Let's keep the conversation going, and let's keep William Schooler's legacy alive. Until next time, take care, and stay engaged.